The night was dark and stormy, rain pelting the windshield of Mark's 18-wheeler as he barreled down a desolate stretch of highway. He had been driving for hours, his headlights cutting through the inky blackness, with nothing but the rhythmic hum of the engine for company. The only thing keeping him awake was the coffee he had been sipping on, his hands gripping the steering wheel in a vice-like grip. As the rain continued to pour, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The radio crackled with static, the signal fading in and out as he tried to find some music to drown out the ominous sounds of the storm. The darkness outside seemed to be closing in on him, and he couldn't help but glance nervously in his mirrors, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. Mark had heard stories from fellow truckers about this stretch of highway. They spoke of strange happenings, of eerie encounters with hitchhikers who would suddenly vanish, leaving nothing but a sense of dread in their wake. He had always dismissed these tales as the ramblings of tired and lonely drivers, but now, as he navigated the rain-slicked road, he couldn't help but wonder if there was some truth to them. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, blinding flash of lightning, followed by a deafening clap of thunder. The rain intensified, making it even harder to see the road ahead. Mark cursed under his breath, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the wheel tighter. And then he saw her. A figure, drenched and hunched by the side of the road, her thumb extended in a desperate plea for a ride. Mark's heart raced as he debated whether to stop. He had heard the stories, the warnings about picking up hitchhikers on this lonely stretch of highway, but he couldn't just leave her there in the storm, could he? With a heavy sigh, he brought the truck to a screeching halt, the air brakes hissing loudly. The woman approached, her soaked clothes clinging to her shivering form. She looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes, her lips quivering. "Please," she begged, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. "I need a ride. I'm stranded out here." Mark hesitated for a moment, torn between the warnings he had heard and his sense of compassion. In the end, he couldn't leave her out there in the storm. He unlocked the door and she climbed into the cab, her clothes leaving a wet stain on the seat. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I would have done." And as they continued down the highway, the woman remained quiet, staring out into the rain. Mark couldn't help but steal glances at her, a sense of unease gnawing at him. There was something about her, something that didn't quite add up, but he dismissed his misgivings, chalking them up to fatigue and the stories he had heard. Little did he know that this decision would set in motion a series of events that would forever haunt him. As the miles passed, the rain showed no sign of letting up, and the tension in the cab grew. The woman's presence seemed to cast a chilling shadow over Mark, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a grave mistake. He glanced at her again, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, her face hidden beneath wet strands of hair. The radio, previously silenced, crackled to life, and a voice emerged from the static, low and raspy. It sent shivers down Mark's spine. "You shouldn't have picked her up, Mark," the voice whispered, as if it knew his thoughts. Mark's heart raced and he reached to turn off the radio, but the dial had gone dead. Panic coursed through him as he realized the voice was coming from the woman beside him. She turned to him, her eyes now piercing and devoid of fear. "You should have listened to the stories, Mark," she said, her voice now cold and unsettling. "This stretch of highway, it's not what it seems." Mark's breath caught in his throat as the truck began to veer off the road, the steering wheel moving of its own accord. He fought to regain control, his heart pounding in his chest, but the cab seemed to have a mind of its own. The woman's laugh echoed through the cab, a haunting sound that sent chills down his spine. "You're not the first to pick me up," she said, her tone filled with malice, "and you won't be the last." As the truck hurtled towards the darkness beyond the road, Mark's mind raced. He had heard tales of haunted highways and sinister spirits, but he had never truly believed them until now. He knew he had to find a way to escape this nightmare. With every ounce of strength, he wrestled the steering wheel back under his control. The truck swerved back onto the road, and the woman let out a scream of rage. Her form seemed to flicker and distort, and Mark could see that she was no ordinary hitchhiker. She was something far more sinister. Mark continued to drive, fear gripping him as the storm raged on. The woman's presence in the cab became more and more unsettling, her features changing and shifting. It was as if she was a creature of the night, a spirit of the highway itself. The miles seemed to stretch on forever, and Mark knew he had to find a way to rid himself of this malevolent presence. With a sudden burst of courage, he pulled the truck to the side of the road and threw open the door. The woman's distorted figure was wrenched from the cab, her scream echoing in the storm. Mark slammed the door shut and watched as the figure, now nothing more than a shadow, faded into the darkness. The radio crackled back to life, the voice gone, and the storm began to subside. As Mark continued his journey down the highway, he couldn't help but glance in his mirrors, half expecting the woman to return. But the road remained empty, and the stories of the haunted highway seemed all too real. He had narrowly escaped a nightmare, and he knew he would never look at the open road